Have you ever looked at your phone, knowing you could text her, but instead you just stared? Not because you didn't care, but because something inside you shifted. You realized, maybe for the first time, that you've been giving your time, your energy, your attention to someone who stopped earning it a long time ago. You see, this isn't about playing games. It's about waking up. There's a moment in every man's life when he reaches the edge. Not the edge of anger or revenge, but the edge of clarity, where you stop talking, not to punish her, but because you finally hear yourself. And when you pull away, something happens that flips everything. She notices, not right away, not while she's scrolling through stories or acting like nothing happened, but when the silence grows louder than any argument you've ever had. And that's when the truth starts burning through her thoughts. Not because you're being cold, but because you're finally warm to yourself. When a man stops chasing, stops explaining, stops justifying, he becomes what she can no longer control. And that shift, that energy, is undeniable. That's when she starts watching. That's when she starts remembering. That's when the masks fall. And you know what most men do. They flinch, they break, they go back. But not you. Not today. Because this time, you're going to see it through. You're going to learn what really happens when you walk away. What she really does when she can't feel your presence anymore. And why this silence, this stillness, is the most powerful thing you've ever done. Today, we're breaking it all down. The psychology, the emotional blueprint, the moves she'll make, the traps she'll set, and what you can do to stay grounded, focused, and untouchable. So before we go any further, comment right now, "I choose silence." Say it out loud. Own it. Let it be a commitment to yourself that from this moment forward, you don't chase, you lead. Number 1. She notices the silence. She feels the shift in the air, the absence of energy that once filled her days, not as a loud gesture but as a constant presence she took for granted, like the hum of electricity powering everything in the background. When you were there, she didn't have to think, worry, or reflect, because she assumed you always would be. The same way you used to show up, consistently, patiently, even when you were overlooked, undervalued, or dismissed as just another guy. And now that you've withdrawn, not as a tactic, but as a decision born from clarity and hard-earned strength, she doesn't know what to make of it. Not because she doesn't care, but because she never imagined that care would need to be earned, and it begins in the small ways. The way she checks her phone, the way she replays the last message, the way she lingers on your name in her contacts, not typing anything, not deleting either, unsure if reaching out will give her closure or cost her dignity. And while she acts composed in front of others, puts on that painted confidence, posts that she's glowing, captioning with borrowed affirmations about growth and happiness, inside she's scrambling to decode what's happening, because you weren't supposed to vanish, you weren't supposed to rise, and definitely not without notifying her that the chapter was closed, and now she's left with only her own questions echoing through the space you used to occupy, trying to remember if there were clues, signs, anything that could explain why the man she once could predict with precision has become unreadable, unavailable, untouchable in a way that doesn't look like anger, doesn't sound like bitterness, but feels like peace. And that peace disturbs her more than conflict ever did. Because in every argument she could still feel your engagement. But this isn't an argument. It's distance so complete that she realizes, maybe for the first time, that her power was never in how loud she could shout, but in how much of your attention she could hold. And now that you've taken that attention back and poured it into yourself, your goals, your strength, your growth, she's watching the version of you she thought would always stay stagnant, transform into the version that no longer needs her applause, her permission, or her recognition to rise, And that's when it truly hits her. Not when you blocked her, not when you disappeared from social media, not even when you stopped liking her pictures, but when she felt herself lose relevance in the world of a man who once saw her as everything, and that absence begins to haunt her. Not with regret at first, but confusion, because she doesn't understand why the game she always won isn't working this time, why the patterns that reeled back every man before you are falling flat, and that confusion, that inability to grasp where she lost her grip, is what makes her begin to notice everything, not just your absence, but her own emptiness, her lack of true connection, her dependence on being needed instead of being worthy. And it sets off a quiet unraveling where her pride keeps her from messaging you, but her heart keeps refreshing your page. Her mind replays the conversations where you gave more than she ever acknowledged, where you listened when others interrupted, where you stayed when others left. And now that you've left with dignity instead of drama, she's caught in the weight of a realization she never thought she'd feel. You were the anchor, and now she's drifting, posting more to feel seen, laughing louder in hopes that someone else notices, but deep down knowing that none of it brings back the grounding presence of the man she thought would always be available. And it's in this moment of recognition, not spoken, not shared with friends, not typed into a post, that she finally notices the truth, not just that you're gone, but that you never begged to stay, and that changes everything. Number 2. Emotional curiosity awakens. Once the absence settles into her world, and she finds that her usual validations, the comments, the reactions, the group chats filled with half-truths and ego strokes, can't silence the whisper of your absence. Something inside her ignites, not loud or dramatic, but persistent, a subtle burn that grows each day she doesn't hear from you, because curiosity doesn't shout, it lingers. And now her thoughts return to your last conversation, the tone of your voice, not just the words but the conviction in them, trying to determine if there was a goodbye hidden in the way you paused between sentences, or a warning in the way you stopped double texting. And the more she thinks, the more questions arise, because your absence isn't random, it's intentional, and intentionality is powerful, especially when it comes from a man who once gave freely and now gives nothing, not out of spite but self-respect. And that mystery becomes a riddle she can't solve, so she checks your page, not once but daily, scans for subtle signs, maybe a quote that hints at missing her, maybe a new follow that sparks jealousy, maybe anything that proves she still has a piece of your attention, because that attention was oxygen, and now she's holding her breath, searching for signs in silence. And each time she comes up empty-handed, the curiosity deepens. Not because she wants you back, yet, but because she needs to understand what changed. And as days turn into weeks, that curiosity becomes emotional weight, pulling her into memories she tried to suppress, laughing at jokes you made under her breath, staring at the ceiling replaying the night you stayed on the phone longer than needed, wondering if you still think about her before bed. And all of this happens in silence. Not because she can't speak, but because she refuses to break first, refuses to admit that she's wondering where you are, who you're with, and if they see what she missed. And it's in that internal tension that her mind begins creating stories, scenarios where you've moved on, where you've elevated, where you've replaced what she thought was irreplaceable. And that doesn't just sting, it confuses her, because the script was always that she leaves and you wait, that she tests and you comply. But now she doesn't even know if you're watching anymore, and that not knowing is worse than hearing you say goodbye, because when you say goodbye she can chase, when you block she can call you bitter, when you fight she can feel your fire. But this absence, leaves her chasing answers in her own head, and emotional curiosity becomes obsession masked in denial. And even when she's out with friends, smiling over cocktails, posting angles that you once complimented, She's secretly watching for your name in the viewers list, listening for your footsteps in memories that won't go quiet. And what started as curiosity turns into an unraveling that pulls at her self-worth, her choices, her history of pushing good men away, only to search for their reflection in men who can't compare. And this is the part no one talks about. That emotional curiosity is the seed of regret, that it grows quietly in the background while she projects confidence to the world. And by the time she realizes she can't replace the energy you brought, the grounded, present, focused energy, it's too late, because you're no longer watching, you're no longer orbiting, and while she's trying to decode your absence, you're creating presence somewhere else, not in another woman, but in your purpose. And that's when it all begins to shift. Not because you chased, but because she finally stopped running and had to look at the space you left behind, a space filled not with noise, but with clarity. Number 3. She tries to provoke you. After all the quiet, after all the uncertainty, she reaches the edge of her ability to stay indifferent. And now it's not about missing you. It's about regaining control. And when she realizes that questioning doesn't bring answers, that rereading old texts doesn't explain why your presence disappeared from her daily rhythm, she doesn't reach out with vulnerability. She doesn't message to express regret. No, what she does next is driven by her need to feel something from you, any response. Because if you react, if you flinch, if you comment, if you even acknowledge that she's still in your thoughts, she can breathe again, knowing she hasn't completely lost her grip on your attention, so she crafts her next move, not by telling you she wants you back, but by testing you, pressing on emotional pressure points she thinks you can't ignore. And the first weapon she reaches for is visibility. She posts something calculated, something bold, something just ambiguous enough to trigger questions in your mind without giving you proof. A late-night photo with a caption about new energy. A story that shows her laughing next to someone she used to call just a friend. A reel sound that cuts too close to one of your private jokes. And when she posts it, she waits. Not for the likes, not for validation from strangers, but for yours, because she remembers how you used to be the first to engage, how your reactions were predictable, how she could feel her own relevance through your immediate responses. But this time, nothing. And that stings, so she escalates it. The next post is more direct. Maybe she shows off a new look you once said you loved. Maybe she references something that only the two of you would understand. And it's not for her audience, it's for you. And every time you don't respond, she tells herself she doesn't care. But deep down, it hits like rejection, because it's not the post. It's the fact that you're not chasing the breadcrumb. And now frustration begins replacing confidence, because your lack of engagement isn't just strange, it's insulting. It challenges the idea she had of herself, the woman who could always get you to react, who could always pull you back with a glance, a picture, a vague quote. But now she realizes that you've grown past those triggers, that you've detached so deeply she can no longer find the strings to pull. And that breaks something inside her that pride alone can't patch. So she tries another angle. This time she tries emotional provocation through mutual connections. She asks about you, subtly, makes sure you hear through someone else that she's living her best life, that she's glowing, that she's seeing someone new. And that's supposed to sting, supposed to shake you, but it doesn't. And your lack of reaction sends her into another kind of tailspin. Because it's not just distance, it's replacement, it's emotional self-sufficiency, and that makes her feel irrelevant, so she considers direct contact. Maybe she sends a random text, something neutral like, "Hope you're good," or "Funny thing reminded me of you." And it's not because she genuinely wants to know, it's because she wants to measure how much space she still occupies in your life, and if you respond too quickly, she feels powerful again. If you ignore it, she tells herself you're bitter, but deep down she's afraid that you're not bitter at all. You're just done, and that fear sits heavier than any other, because a man who's angry can still be manipulated, a man who's hurt can still be reeled in, but a man who's indifferent, that man is unreachable. And the more you hold your position, the more her attempts morph from passive to desperate, not in volume, but in intent, and what she once used as a test becomes a mirror she can't avoid, showing her how little control she truly had, because you're not ignoring her to punish her, you're just focused on your life, and in that shift, you redefine her role, not as your mistake, but as your lesson, and that's the one test she didn't prepare to fail. Number 4. She pretends she moved on. When all her subtle tactics fail, when every calculated attempt to provoke you lands with a dull thud, and she realizes that she no longer occupies the space in your world she once took for granted, she leans into the only strategy she has left, the illusion of indifference, not to heal, not to grow, but to appear unaffected. And this isn't just a defense mechanism, it's a narrative she carefully curates for the outside world to see. Because if she can convince them, maybe she can convince herself. So she shifts gears, starts posting more aggressively, not just pictures of her smiling or enjoying life, but crafted imagery designed to say, "I've moved on." And it's not real, not even close, but it's loud, because she wants to drown out the regret she's beginning to feel by pretending it doesn't exist. So she makes sure to include group outings, new faces, cryptic captions about self-love and choosing herself. And all of it serves a single purpose: to bait your curiosity, to make you wonder if she's really over you, but she knows you're not watching. And that's what makes her keep posting, not because you're present, but because your absence forces her to try even harder. And every staged moment is layered with emotional makeup. She hopes looks like freedom, but feels like denial. And though her friends may cheer her on, though the comments flood in with fire emojis and heart eyes, none of it touches the part of her that aches quietly when the notifications fade, and she's left scrolling through a life that doesn't include you anymore. Not because you removed her, but because she finally noticed you stopped making space for her. And in that realization, her performance becomes more exhausting, because now she's maintaining a persona, not expressing truth. And every day she wears that mask, it feels heavier, because the reality she's trying to bury is still very much alive. And as she dates casually, entertaining men who don't challenge her emotionally, who don't listen deeply, who don't ground her like you did, she starts to notice the difference, not immediately, but in the little things, like how their compliments feel forced, how their presence feels temporary, how their excitement never leads to certainty. And in those comparisons, she begins to feel the weight of your absence, not because she misses being with someone, but because she misses being with someone who knew her deeper than the surface she now hides behind. And that craving for depth begins to burn through her pretense, so she tries to shake it off, takes another trip, shares more content, poses with someone who might make you think she's found better, but inside she knows the truth, that she hasn't found someone better. She's found someone easier, someone who didn't see her at her worst and still choose her, someone who didn't walk through fire with her and come out stronger, someone who didn't have the backbone to walk away when she pushed too far. And that difference makes all the noise in her life sound hollow, because what she pretends to have now is not the same. It's not close. And as she puts her phone down, exhausted from trying to look unbothered, she starts to face what she's been avoiding all along. That pretending to move on doesn't mean you've actually moved on, that distractions aren't healing, and that no matter how convincing the outside looks, the inside still feels the gap you left. And when she closes her eyes at night, when the world isn't watching, that's when your name returns, not in bitterness, but in longing, not because you were perfect, but because you were real. And now she's stuck in a reality where the one who felt the most like home is the one who left without slamming the door, who never looked back, and who never asked for closure. And that kind of man is not easy to forget, not easy to replace. and not something she'll ever find again in a world that rewards instant gratification over deep connection. And in that truth, the weight of her loss finally settles in. Not because you said anything, but because you didn't need to. Number 5. She seeks validation. She doesn't sit with the loss. She runs from it, tries to overwrite it with attention, the kind that feels sweet but never stays, the kind that floods her inbox but never fills her heart. Assistant power feels hollow, because no matter how many likes she racks up, or how many men reply to her story within minutes, none of them carry the weight of your presence. None of them challenge her. And deep down she knows this, because validation without depth becomes noise, a temporary high that crashes the second the screen dims. And while she used to be able to silence doubt by drowning it in compliments, now those compliments only remind her of what she used to have: attention that wasn't cheap, affection that wasn't forced, value that came from your discipline, not her desperation. And she begins to crave what she once dismissed: your consistency, your steadiness, your depth. Because the truth is, she never needed attention from the world. She needed substance from one man, and when she had it, she mistook it for weakness. But now she sees it for what it was: rare. And in her effort to forget, she makes herself more visible, dressing sharper, laughing louder, posting more, waiting for that rush of responses to tell her she's okay. But each time it fades faster, and the emptiness grows louder, because she's not just missing you. She's realizing she had something few women ever truly get: security without control, and she traded it for noise, traded something she needed for something she could manipulate, and now the validation she used to crave becomes a reminder that she's been replaced, not by another woman, but by your self-worth. And the more she tries to find a man who gives her that same internal calm, the more exhausted she becomes, because she's no longer chasing admiration, she's chasing a ghost. And no matter how many people tell her she looks good, she's only listening for one voice, and it's the one that no longer speaks, not out of malice, but out of completion, because you're done trying to be understood by someone who only sees your value when it's gone. And she's left scrolling through comments that feel empty and smiles that feel fake, all while knowing deep down that true validation doesn't come from outside. It comes from being seen by someone who doesn't need you, but chooses you. And she lost that when she lost you. Number 6. Her mind starts comparing. She never wanted to compare you. She wanted to replace you. That was the plan. Move on quickly, meet someone who checks the same boxes, someone easier, someone who doesn't challenge her, someone who gives without boundaries. But as she walks into the arms of a man who doesn't carry the same weight, who laughs too easily, who agrees too quickly, who doesn't look her in the eye the way you used to, something inside her starts breaking, not all at once, but slowly, painfully, because now, without intending to, she starts lining him up next to you, not with resentment, but with regret, because he doesn't listen like you did, doesn't hold her like you did, doesn't know when to be silent, or when to speak without being asked, and that contrast becomes unbearable. Not because he's a bad man, but because he's not you. And now everything he does is filtered through the memory of the man who used to make her feel grounded without trying, who used to guide without commanding, who never had to raise his voice to be heard. And it starts small. She notices the way he texts, the words he uses, the way his presence feels performative, not rooted. And she tells herself to stop comparing, but she can't, because every trait she once took for granted in you is missing in him, and worse, she knows why. Because she left behind something built and now stands in something borrowed, something shallow. And that realization doesn't lead her back to you, it leads her deeper into a pit of self-doubt. Because she told herself you weren't that special. She believed it, until she saw that no one else brought peace to her chaos like you did. And now she's stuck in a world where the new faces blur together, and the past becomes clearer every day. And every conversation feels like a copy of something that used to be real. And every time she feels disappointment, your name resurfaces. Not because she wants to come back, but because she wishes she never left. Because when you compare anything to realness, everything else starts to feel fake, and she's haunted by that comparison. Not because you're perfect, but because you were authentic, and in a world full of men who say what she wants to hear, you were the one who said what she needed to hear, and she remembers now. The way you paused before speaking, the way you challenged her when she played games, the way you never gave her everything without making sure it was respected. And now she has everything she thought she wanted, but none of it matters because it doesn't feel like you, and she can't recreate that feeling, can't fake it, can't settle, because once a woman knows the difference between being admired and being respected, she can't unsee it, and now every man that follows feels smaller, less certain, more afraid of her edges, while you embraced them, not to control her, but to hold her accountable. And she's left comparing men who seek her attention to a man who sought her truth, and that's a comparison they'll never win. Number 7. She faces the truth. The walls start to crumble not when she's with someone else, not when she posts her 100th photo pretending she's free, not even when she sees you living well without her, but when she's alone, when the music stops, when the lights go out, and the only thing she has left is the memory of what she gave away too easily. And that's when the truth comes. Not all at once, but in waves. Waves that crash quietly at first, then violently, because now there's no one left to distract her from herself. And the truth doesn't speak in grand revelations. It whispers. Whispers that you were the one who stayed steady when she was inconsistent, the one who stayed composed when she was unpredictable, the one who forgave when she tested, the one who held firm when she pushed. And now that truth becomes unbearable, not because you're unreachable, but because you've evolved, and she feels it. Not in your words, but in your absence. And now she can't unfeel the difference, and the truth tears into her pride, makes her question her choices, her habits, her patterns, and it hurts. Not because she wants to undo what happened, but because she knows she can't. Because even if she could go back, she knows she'd have to face a new version of you, one she no longer qualifies for. And that truth hits harder than the breakup ever did, because now she's aware that you didn't just move on, you leveled up, and she's still stuck, repeating patterns, chasing highs, avoiding depth, while you turned pain into discipline, doubt into focus, heartbreak into strength. And the truth is, she was never the lesson you were, and she failed the test, not because you asked for too much, but because she was too used to too little. And now the cost is not just losing a man, it's realizing she lost the only man who made her want to grow, the only one who didn't worship her, but instead challenged her to be better. And that truth is what she now carries, not publicly, not proudly, but privately, in the quiet places where regret lives, where honesty stings, where the weight of knowing you won't come back becomes heavier than anything you ever said. And she faces it fully, not because she's healed, but because she's finally awake. And in that awakening, she doesn't find hope. She finds loss, because she didn't just lose a relationship. She lost a reflection of the man she could have risen beside, and now you've risen without her. Number 8. Focus on your growth, not her traps. You've heard the excuses. You've seen the patterns. You've lived through the confusion, the withdrawal, the need to understand why she stopped showing up for you the way you did for her. But now, all of that fades into background noise because there's only one thing that matters. Your growth, and not the kind of growth that you show off to get her attention, not the aesthetic, look what you missed kind, but the kind that remakes you, rewires you, and rebuilds your entire identity from the ground up, because everything you gave her, the effort, the loyalty, the emotional labor, that belongs to you now, and you don't get to waste it reminiscing over someone who couldn't recognize your worth when it was right in front of her, handed to her, wrapped in patience, strength, and consistency. So now is not the time to wonder if she'll come back. Now is not the time to check if she's watching. Now is not the time to fall for traps designed to measure how emotionally reactive you still are. And believe this, her attempts to trigger you, whether through posts, new guys, subtle shade, or passive-aggressive messages, are not signs of power. They are confessions of loss. And your only job now is to not take the bait, not because you're avoiding her, but because you've elevated so far beyond her games that responding would be a betrayal to the man you're becoming, the man who's tired of living in emotional quicksand, who's exhausted by the idea that his peace must always come second to someone else's confusion, so you stop playing, not because you're bitter, but because you've realized your energy is currency, and every moment spent decoding her mixed signals is a withdrawal from your future, from your vision, from the empire you're building, and that empire. It doesn't require her validation, her presence, or her regret. It only requires one thing: your discipline, the discipline to show up for yourself every single day, to go to the gym not because you're angry, but because you're committed, to write down your goals and break them into actionable steps, to spend your nights improving instead of reacting, to build a mind so sharp and a body so strong that no woman becomes a distraction. Because the real trap isn't her behavior. It's your desire to be acknowledged by someone who failed to recognize your value when it counted. And once you break that need, once you stop wanting closure and start chasing your mission, everything changes, because now your life becomes about output, about impact, about legacy, not validation, not ego, and not revenge. And here's where the world starts to notice. Not her, but everyone. Because when a man grows without needing to be seen, he becomes unforgettable. Not because he was loud, but because he was undeniable. And while she posts stories looking for reaction, you're out in the real world building something no algorithm can track. Something real, something lasting. And your presence becomes something so rare, so unshakable, that even if she came back, even if she poured her heart out, you'd look at her and realize the man who once would have begged for her attention no longer exists, and in his place stands someone with vision, focus, and unshakable standards, not because of what she did, but because you chose to stop living below your potential. And that's the key. This was never about her. It was about what you allowed, what you tolerated, what you accepted in the name of love. And now you love yourself enough to say no, enough to walk away, enough to never return to the man you used to be, just to comfort someone who didn't grow with you. Because the only thing worse than losing her would be losing yourself trying to win her back. And when you understand that, when you truly live that truth, you don't need closure. You are closure. And your life becomes the proof that everything you lost was just the beginning of everything you were meant to build. You've heard everything she'll do, but none of it matters unless you decide who you'll become. Because the truth is, most men will repeat the same cycle, fall for the same trap, lose themselves in women who never planned to grow with them, and wake up years later full of bitterness, brokenness, and regret. But not you, not this time, because now you know better. And when a man knows better, he either changes his life or proves he never wanted to. So if this hit home, if you feel that fire rising inside you, comment, "I choose me," below right now to stamp it into your identity. Then like this video and subscribe, not just for content, but to help this message reach the men who are still sleepwalking through betrayal, still bleeding in silence, still stuck on women who never earned their sacrifice. Because this video isn't just words, it's a mirror for your future. And if you want to go deeper, if you want the full playbook on how to walk away with dignity, rebuild your mind, master discipline, and unlock a level of peace no woman can take from you, I've written it all down in one ruthless, no-fluff guide. The ebook is linked in the comments, but it won't be available forever, because this level of truth isn't meant for the masses. It's for the few who are ready to evolve. So get it now before it disappears. Invest in yourself, support the mission, and let's make sure no man ever wastes years chasing someone who was never worth the sacrifice.